There we go. Hello and good evening. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Yountville Zoning Design Review Board for Tuesday, September 12th, 2023. I would like to call this meeting to order, and we will begin with a roll call.
Yes, Board Member Depolsky.
Here.
Board Member Henthorn. Here. Board Member Saguser. Sorry, I mispronounced it.
Zagorsek.
Zagorsek.
I'm here.
Board Member Cook.
Here.
And Chair Miller.
Here. Great, thank you. If you'd all join me in standing towards the flag for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we move on to adoption of the agenda. Is there someone that would like to motion to adopt the agenda?
Motion to adopt the agenda.
Thank you. Excellent. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Excellent. The agenda is adopted. We move on to nomination for chair and vice chair of the Zoning and Design Review Board. Do we have anybody that would like to make a comment or a nomination?
There's no requirement that we change necessarily, right?
The bylaws state that the chair will be in place for 1 year, and then it is expected that a different person will take on the role of chair. That's based on the bylaws of the CDRB.
Really? Yes. Okay. Because I think that there's a lot to be said for continuity. So we need to pick somebody different?
Well, again, I would assume, and Mackenzie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but again, I would assume if the board chooses to re-elect a member, there's not an issue, but again, I don't know if that's a legal.
I don't think it would pose any issue.
Okay. I think Stephen has built up a good relationship with our new members of staff, Irene and Brad. So I would like to make a motion that he continue as chair of the ZDRB.
I will second.
All in favor? All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Thank you. I gladly accept your nomination and election to the chair. Approval of minutes. Do we have minutes?
Chair Miller, we still need to make an appointment for vice chair as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, vice chair. Of course.
Do you want to be vice chair too?
I want to be vice chair too. I want to be all the chairs.
I think Michael does a great job of controlling meetings and is very thoughtful in his comments, and I would nominate Michael Zagorsek for vice chair.
I second that.
Same. Yeah.
So all in favor? Aye. Excellent.
Perfect.
I humbly accept your nomination for vice chair.
Okay. Thank you. Now we move on to item number 6, approval of minutes. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay,
That
good.
is correct, Chair.
Thank you.
I went through the minutes and didn't see anything that needed to be changed. The minutes for August 8th, so I will make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Approval. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye. Excellent. The minutes are approved. Public comment on matters not listed on the agenda. Mr. Bork, please step up to the podium and tell us what's up.
Thank you. So first of all,
If I can just have you state your name for the record.
I'm Michael Bork. I'd like to congratulate your new member. I feel confident that the council has made a good choice. I hope and expect that you're experience will be a good one, and that it will be to the benefit of all of us here in Yountville.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So the thing that I wanted to bring up specifically was the matter of the property at 6630 Jefferson. So I have some questions, and I understand that you can answer them if you feel like it. So the first one I have is I am reminded that the property across where we live, after they improperly tore down the house, which was not by permit, they were required to come to the ZDRB for reapproval. So I'm hoping and wondering if the developers at 6630 need to come to you again, since they have so egregiously not followed the agreement they had made with you and perhaps with the council. So that's my first question. And my second question is there a possibility, what I recall is that originally it was going to be 2 houses, each with an ADU, and then suddenly it was one giant house with an ADU. Given everything that's been written over the years and the special treatment or different kind of treatment that Old Town has had, it seems really inappropriate to me that suddenly we have a house of that size. I didn't go and look. I don't know that anybody has this on hand, but my sense is that this is a part of town that has, in many cases, relatively small houses. Stephen, yours is small. Eric's next to it is one of the bigger ones, but most of the houses are probably 2,000 square feet and less, I think. And if I remember correctly, this was suddenly going to be 3,800 square feet. So if there's a possibility that you have an opportunity to review this again, and if there is something within the zoning, which I didn't find, but there may be something, that allows you some opportunity to push to be 2 houses instead of 1, I would be very much for that. And the last question that I have is whether or not the town has made a deal, and whether it has or not, whether we as a community will have an opportunity to hear about that before the deal is done. My sense is that what I read in the Sun and what I've gleaned from conversations that I've had with council members is that there's a variety of things that they're exploring, notably that they would need to somehow rebuild what they tore down. On a personal basis, I'm really concerned about the fact that a developer can so easily go against what an agreement that they'd made. In this case, a significant one, considering the fact that you can't really rebuild history, in my view. So for a relatively small amount of money, perhaps, they get to do what they want. And that sends a message that is not new. This is something that in our capitalist society is done over and over again. The $5,000 fee that they're going to pay, is, in my view, is a rounding error for the cost of nails for that kind of property. So those are my 3 questions, and I'm hoping that the board will see fit to answer those. I understand that you're not required to, but I think it would be lovely if you did. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. First of all, I am remiss in not welcoming our new member, Kenneth Deposky. Thank you. Good to have you here. I feel like you've been on this board for some reason, just because I know you and we're colleagues, and you fit right in. So it's a good thing to see you here. Michael, as far as this body goes, I'm afraid we're largely in the dark right now. We ask the same kinds of questions that you do, and have the same, I share your concerns, certainly on a personal level, but from the standpoint of the board, we don't get a lot of information pertinent to this issue, and I would like more. We get some, but not a lot, and at least what I know from the people that I've spoken to, the town manager and the building director right now, it is in the hands of the attorneys, if I'm not mistaken, that there are negotiations being worked out that we are not a party to.
That's an accurate statement, and obviously one of the things I'll talk about when I make my presentation in terms of enforcement compliance, we'll kind of get to think one of the issues we keep hearing in terms of the idea that it's a rounding error, begging for forgiveness is somehow a cost of business. So I do think that's something we will address. But until the lawyers and the negotiations are complete, I don't want to get ahead of the process and provide an incomplete report.
I think it goes to be said that some of us who sit on this dais this evening heard several hours of testimony or presentation by the architect and homeowner, and are party to information that is very counter to what has happened. And I think I would like to be included in decisions that are made on what that property will look like going forward, now that it looks nothing like what they said that they were going to build. So that I would like to just put that out there. If that's a possibility, it would be great to be included. I think it should come back to ZDRB. I agree with you, Michael.
I would say in general, I mean, this is a procedural body with the subjective element of design review. So when a plan is presented and it comes and we approve it, the expectation obviously is that it's executed against that plan. I would say there have been some areas where small changes get approved by staff that don't require coming back, and I think there's a history of good examples and bad examples of that. My understanding of this case is that because of its unique status, I mean, once it's approved by us, it's in the hands of the town, and unfortunately we just get updated when everyone else does. However, given the material change that we know has happened, I think I would be under the assumption, unless told otherwise, that it would need to come back. For sure, because it was a material change to the design.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments?
Chair Miller, I just want to acknowledge that we did receive an electronic public comment for non-agendized items.
Okay.
And this is from Allison Bensick. She said, "My name is Allison Bensick. I am writing on behalf of Napa School for Climate Action. My co-president, Liliana Koresh, and I have previously presented. During that time, we requested an ordinance to prohibit new and expanding gas stations and a strengthened tree protection ordinance to maintain and enhance carbon sinks. In 2022, the town of Youngville declared a climate emergency and pledged to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. These goals require deviating from the status quo, and we are excited to see the town pursuing more significant measures for tree protection. Climate-safe tree management should aim to protect and enhance carbon stored by the urban forest in Youngville. This includes stopping cutting down more trees, as this releases even more carbon into the atmosphere, which causes GHGs, which also causes the blanket of heat, which increases the global temperature. This also calls for protecting all living trees, and this is vital as it is extremely important to keep the living tree safe, because we do not have enough time left in the climate emergency to wait for newly seeded and planted trees to grow to a mature age at which they can sequester carbon at a similar rate as the currently old and mature trees that are living today. Youngville is leading the way in these efforts, and working towards the new approach is part of the necessary shifts that we must make if we want to sustain and restore our climate. I believe that was related to the public hearing. Am I correct? My apologies. It was related to the public hearing.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fine. Well, I guess we'll hear it again.
We can acknowledge it for the record that it was read.
Excuse me?
We'll acknowledge that it was read into the record.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, I think that concludes item 7, the public comment on matters not listed on the agenda, and we move on to item 8, the Fresh Start Zoning and Design Review, Board Roles and Governance.
So I will take the lead and work with Irene and Mackenzie on this report. If you can pull up the PowerPoint, Eddie. While you do that, I also will welcome Kenneth, your newest member, and also congratulate Stephen on being reelected to the chair. We look forward to working with you. And, you know, we use the term fresh start because of how much change really there's been on the staff side, but obviously as well as, you know, new members and, you know, folks, you know, coming out of COVID, it seems like there's always these sort of new changes that people are working through, both, you know, from a governance standpoint of how we have meetings and so forth. But I also think with, you know, starting with me joining the team, you know, I came from a jurisdiction where I staffed the Planning Commission for over 10 years, so I've sat through 100 or so of these types of meetings, and my initial observation was that legal counsel was always present in those. So that was, you know, one thing that I, you know, talked to Gary and at least got the general nods from the council that would be an enhancement. And I want to keep using the word enhancement because I don't see anything broken here. I just think there's things we can do to enhance what's happening at the ZDRB level. And this presentation kind of focuses on the first step of that. And we do want to take your suggestions in terms of what you'd like to see in the future. So with that, you know, the role of the ZDRB kind of gets broken into several categories. Advanced planning, as most of you know, is longer range planning. We're not currently in the process of doing that, but I know a number of you went through the comprehensive general plan update, which is the most significant. And as you know, part of your role is to advise on the creation and the amendment of those documents. And then under current planning, you know, you have the division of discretionary permits, which come to you, and then you typically advise the council on. Some cases, you make the decision, which could be appealed to the council. And then there are ministerial permits, which the staff handles. And then within the discretionary process, you do project review, you do design review within that, CEQA, and then project approvals. The guiding documents, if you will, start with the general plan and the zoning code. I think you know the zoning code, I think, was updated 2 years ago, I want to say, and the design guidelines and or the design review guidelines, and they were merged all into chapter or title 17. As I understand, in most cases, this is through Gary, our town attorney, a lot of the changes in order to give the ZDRB the authority needed to you know, sort of act as a planning commission were enacted during that process. But that's been something I've talked to some of you about. I think with Gary's insight, you know, we could talk more about that. But the good news is between the general plan and the zoning ordinance, you've done a lot of good work in the last, you know, I'll call it 5 years. I think the rule of thumb that's out there with planning is that you look at those types of documents every 10 years, but there are some agencies that truthfully haven't looked at them in 30 or 40 years. So it's a big undertaking when you do that. And so the fact that you've done that is great for us, gives us a foundation. And then we can talk about more specific plan and more specific actions that you'd like to see. Because sometimes, even though in a town like Yountville you can be specific in your general plan and get into details, you're still dealing with high-level policy, and you're not, in a lot of cases, getting into some of the issues like housing and things that are probably things you do want to get deeper into. And then I think most of you know that the California Building Code is a state document. It's also a foundational document, and in a lot of cases, both the building and fire codes sort of dictate a lot of what can and can't happen. But there's, you know, the statement is always we can be stricter, but we can't be more lenient. And typically, you know, even though there are things you can do to be stricter, in most cases, the state is paving the way on those types of things. So this pyramid sort of kind of lines things up where at the top of the pyramid is the general plan, and you work through specific plan zoning and design guidelines to make some of the decisions you make, subdivision maps, permits, conditional use permits, variances, I asked the question today, and I think it's good practice, whether it's policy or not. I haven't heard the answer, but I am accustomed to the CIP, which is the capital improvement program that the town proposes through the town council each year. There's typically a review of that by ZDRB to make sure it's consistent with the general plan. And I do think that is an important step that we will start to include, so you can look at capital projects and at least advise council on whether you see inconsistencies with the long-range documents. So that's something that I think will also be useful to the group as you think about your sort of goals. The town structure, as you know, it's relatively small. The town council, of course, appoints the boards and commissions and then hires myself and the attorney to advise and oversee the operations. In this case, we have Irene as our planning and building director. And I am in the process of moving code compliance. We have one employee that does code compliance. So that it's not final until the council. I'm bringing forward some restructuring at the next council meeting, but that's one of the things when I got here, the code compliance officer reported directly to me. And although they do code compliance throughout the town and do stuff in public works and what have you, it's pretty traditional that person reports to planning and building, because generally that's where 90% of that work falls. So with that, I wanted to give Irene the opportunity to talk about her team and what she does.
So again, as Brad mentioned, our organizational structure within the planning department starts with myself as the planning and building director. We also have our contract building official through Contract Building Services of BPR Consulting Group, and we have Mike Zimmer, who's our building official, and also our building inspector. Again, as you know, our building department is part-time, so he's here typically a couple of days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, doing the inspections, and most of our plan checks go out to the consulting firm to go through that process. We have two assistant planners here. We have Diane and Kyle, who you're all familiar with. And then we have a position for a planning manager, but right now that position is underfilled, and we have both Kyle and Diane here to serve as assistant planners. As Brad mentioned too, we have Kendra Bruno, who's our code compliance officer, and Kendra will be joining us the planning and building team shortly, and she's a great asset to have. As Brad mentioned, again, a lot of the code compliance issues fall under planning and building for the most part, so it'll be a good addition. We have an administrative assistant. Typically, that's Vanita in the front office that you know. Vanita helps us out typically with some of our administrative work. Her position is kind of a shared position among other departments and planning. So some of the planning functions, again, we provide information on land use, zoning, and site development standards, again, from Title 17 of our zoning ordinance. We'll review development proposals for compliance with our town standards. A number of those proposals, as you know, come before the ZDRB for approval and consideration. We have a number of various planning and compliance programs that we are associated with and kind of administer. So I'll go over those in a little bit. We do, as Brad mentioned, do some advanced planning and policy implementation, and code compliance, again, is a big part of what we do. And Brad already mentioned about some of our, guiding documents, the general plan and the zoning ordinance, which we use on a daily. In terms of advanced planning, we do some long-range planning, such as housing elements and the general plan. Just an update for our housing element, we're still waiting for HCD, Housing and Community Development, to certify our documents, so hopefully we hear from them soon, but we're still going through that process. We'll do municipal code amendments. You have one tonight before you for the tree ordinance and preservation ordinance. So those are some of the things that you'll see before you at the last meeting. We also had the gas station ban, so you might see a few more ordinance amendments coming before the ZDRB in the future. We do some policy implementation. So again, with the general plan or housing element, there are things that need to be implemented. programs and policies after those things are adopted, so we need to do some of that as well too. So those typically come before the ZDRB for recommendation to council as well. Part of our job includes some data and development tracking that we do. We also do some state reporting, such as our annual progress report for housing, which is due every April. So we need to make sure that we get that document done and we comply with the state requirements in April. Planning Division also provides counter services. We help with public inquiries, answer questions about zoning and land use and permit information. And again, we'll help applicants with applications and submittals. Sometimes applicants need a lot of hand-holding through the process and describing what that process entails. So we'll help them through that process as well. Again, we do development review, so we're evaluating land use proposals for consistency with our town regulations. We'll coordinate project review with our other departments and or other outside agencies if necessary, such as Fish and Wildlife. And we prepare staff reports for both the ZDRB and the town council. And again, within those reports, we try and outline the requirements of the municipal code for you to be able to make a hopefully a favorable recommendation, but we provide you with that background information to guide you with your decision. Some of the programs that we administer is the employee parking management program. Kyle handles that for us. Our rental registration permit program, Diane is typically the person that handles those. Use permit compliance monitoring, that is kind of something that Kyle handles or we all kind of pitch in together. But we do an annual use permit compliance program monitoring every year, so that takes a bit of time to go through that process. We have our Washington Street activation permits and also our wayfinding sign program that we administer. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Brad.
Thank you, and wanted you to hear from Irene everything that happens in that department, because clearly it's a lot more than just what you see before you. And with Diane and Kyle, I think they're small but mighty, and been really pleased and impressed with the work that they do. So thank you all. I want to say that publicly, and keep up the good work. As we get into effective meetings or governance, I brought this slide, which is from the Institute of Local Governments. That's who ILG is. And I'm not going to read it all, but I think, this is sort of, on some level, common sense. And truthfully, it's really been somewhat of a relief and nice to see the civility of Yountville and the community's very engaged, but, in the right way. It's just, to me, a very productive conversation, both at the ZDRB and the council, all boards and commissions and the council. So, very, very little of this needs to be emphasized. But I do think when you are in a small town, and when I talk to the council, this distinction between values, interest, and positions is sometimes tricky, right? Because it's hard to separate people from the problem because you know everyone. And it's like, and I think when you focus on the interests and not the positions of people, and you really look for win-wins, and you insist on objective criteria, you tend to have better meetings. So I would just encourage you all, when you're thinking about things, really try to take the people out of it and try to just focus on the project and the standards that the town has created, because they are high. And I think as long as we maintain them, we're going to be in a good place. And then I'm going to talk about Rosenberg's Rules of Order, which are technically kind of what you follow. But I think it's interesting because those were created from Robert's Rules of Order, the old parliamentarian procedures. And I think for purposes of simplicity, and I think I'm kind of the mind that Rosenberg's has gotten too confusing. So I'm going to try to boil that down to kind of the simple process for making decisions. And I think that's where the public needs to be engaged. And I think, the more efficient and the effective the meetings, the more you're really going to, whether you're watching at home or you're in the audience, I think everyone appreciates those types of meetings. And the last bullet in terms of having trust, I think, I just want to encourage you to trust the staff. The staff, even though they get put in tough spots in certain occasions, always has the town's best interests at the forefront and is always willing to talk to you as a group, but easier as individuals, or at least under the Brown Act as pairs, to have those deeper conversations about sort of why did this happen or why did that, and know that we're all available to you as you think about these things, and obviously hear from your neighbors and your constituents. I gave Mackenzie one slide. She started with a 24-slide deck, but I'm going to let her walk through the legal requirements of meetings.
Okay, here is the briefest possible training on the Brown Act and the Public Records Act. So the Ralph M. Brown Act, codified in Government Code Section 54950. The first thing to ask yourself under the Brown Act is, what is a meeting for purposes of the Brown Act? And a meeting is any congregation of a majority of members to hear, discuss, or deliberate on town-related business. So this includes deliberations that are accomplished through staff intermediaries and even through accidental CC email chains. Even though the Brown Act doesn't apply to individual contacts, you need to be careful that those individual conversations don't eventually culminate into a majority of the board having deliberated on a matter. So the overall takeaway is to make sure that the public has an opportunity to participate in that decision making. So next, as you all know, we post agendas generally 72 hours ahead of the regular meetings. They're posted 24 hours ahead of special meetings. There are exceptions to these hourly requirements for emergency meetings or when an urgent need comes up and is brought to the town's attention after an agenda has been posted. Again, you need to allow the public to comment on an item before you act on it. There will be public comment periods that are specific to an item being considered, and also a general public comment period, as you are aware and saw today. So the takeaway here is to make sure you are only acting on matters that the public has been given proper notice of, so that they have a chance to speak their mind on an item before an action is taken. So, moving to the California Public Records Act, this is a very broad application to any writing containing information relating to the conduct of the public's business, prepared, owned, used, or retained by an agency, regardless of physical form or characteristics. So this even includes text messages or emails that are on your personal accounts if it concerns public business. The general rule of thumb here will be to treat any request for information as a Public Records Act request, because the town will have limited periods of time to make these records available and to assist requesters. So let the town clerk know ASAP if you get a request. Next, you will be required to participate in AB 1234 and 1661 trainings. AB 1234 requires 2 hours of ethics training within the first year of taking office, and then every 2 years after. AB 1661 requires 2 hours of sexual harassment training within the first 6 months of taking office, then every 2 years thereafter. You will also be required to file Form 700s. I believe you do it electronically, which is super helpful, to disclose any financial or proprietary interest that may lead to a conflict of interest. And conflict of interest laws are beyond the scope of this training, but if you think you may have a conflict, please come talk to our office, and the general rule will be you will need to disclose that interest that causes the conflict and publicly recuse yourself. There are exceptions, but they are quite complicated and fact-specific. So just reach out for help if you need assistance with that. And thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was the best Brown Act PRA presentation I ever heard. And you'll see at the next slide, and this is some of the things we want to hear from you. If you want more as a group, we're happy to bring it back. But also as individuals, particularly as new members, you should go through the orientation, and Mackenzie's a resource for you to make sure you don't get into trouble in the state of California, which has a lot of rules as those that are involved. So this is kind of how I simplify the Rosenberg's 10. So when you look at Rosenberg's rules, there's sort of 10 steps to any agenda item, which is an action item. And so I kind of boil it down to 7 because I add one, and you see kind of in blue the one I added, and then in red I kind of consolidate a few into one step versus 3. So the first thing you do is, and you will get that next on the tree ordinance, is you'll get the presentation from the staff. In this case, there's no applicant, so you don't have to hear that. And I think with the ZDRB, it's a little more loose, and I think in some cases for good reason. So I really think it's the presiding officer's discretion to kind of lead the meeting, but there are best practices, and I think as long as you follow this order, I think you're in line. And I can talk to you offline, Stephen, on some of the stuff at least I advise the council on, and you'll see we are making some slight modifications to the chambers to enhance kind of this process, but also to figure out how to request to be heard, or request to speak, and voting, and those things can I think be enhanced. But we can talk about that more. For purposes of this, after the application, or excuse me, after the presentation, you're limited to clarifying questions. So clarifying questions can sometimes evolve into comments. So I think you need to be careful, and I think I've asked Mackenzie to help sort of police kind of the process. So she's I think shown that she's willing to do that in the last meeting. But I think it's also helpful. Sometimes it's hard to take yourself out of, again, kind of what you're feeling. And the purpose of this, of course, is to make sure everyone's hearing the same thing and all questions are answered. And then you receive public comment. And once you're done with public comment, even though Rosenberg tells you that should be the point in time when the chair invites the motion, so that somebody makes a motion, somebody makes a second, then you get into all the Rosenberg rules of, in some cases, the second motion, or the substitute motion and friendly amendments, and that's a whole different discussion. But I have found, and I think it's important, especially in planning, in some cases there's follow-up questions based on whatever public comment was made. So, at the chair's discretion, could you answer that? Or through the chair, as a lot of people like to say, the colleagues can say, hey, can we get that clarified? This public comment made X, Y, Z. That's sort of new information. Is that true? Is that not true? And then staff can hopefully help you there. But generally, there's also kind of a dialogue that happens, which is sort of leading to a motion, where you start to feel each other out in terms of, what your positions might be. And I think that's appropriate. But at the same time, if you go back to Rosenberg, he would tell you should have a motion on the floor before you start discussing anything. But again, I think that added step is pretty typical. So I would just make you conscious of the time that takes, because ultimately the motion is what matters, and obviously it needs to be seconded. And then, we want to make sure that as the staff that it's clear, and I think that's where I think a lot of the conversations where if someone can say, oh well, I'm not kind of feeling this way, but I don't know that I feel that, and ABC, and then somebody says, well, I like a motion to support the recommendation, and everything Ken just said, and then it's like, okay, well, what did Ken just say? And so we have to backtrack into those, comments and try to kind of come down to, what exactly you decided at the end of the day. So it's really, really helpful, again, to get the second and then clarify the motion. And in many cases, either the attorney or the clerk can do that. They take usually good notes, and they can help you. Or in some cases, they can help you shape the motion. If you're like, well, this is really what I want to do, but how can we do that based on, whatever legal parameters we have? I think that's really critical on it, because this always comes back to, defending the action, assuming, the applicant, does come back and question, I guess, the validity of whatever enforcement or compliance action we might take in the future. So it is critical to build this record and to go through this process. And then when the motion's on the floor, then I think it's free game to deliberate and say whatever you want until you call the vote. And then when you call the vote, it's legally the required that I think the clerk typically announces what the vote was. So that's the 10 or 7-step process, and hopefully that's helpful. Again, I've heard an hour and a half, 2 hours on Rosenberg's, and we're trying to keep it real high level, but it's important stuff, and I do think friendly amendments and substitute motions, all that stuff we can talk about, but I haven't seen this group do too much of that. But it's part of the process, and it's important. So moving into this idea of a handbook, and we have a draft version, which I'm not going to share with you tonight, but I just want to point it out because you currently all receive this when you become. But I do think ZDRB should have a specific or a unique handbook because you're not the council, but you definitely are not like Public Art or the Park and Rec Board, where you're taking actions which need to have some legal standing and so forth. So we're going to work on that. I think some of you know that actually right when I got here, we kind of reshaped what used to be called protocols into what is now the Town Council Handbook. So they voted on that. We will do our best to create consistencies between the two because most of it is just basic stuff. But there's some things, again, that are unique to the ZDRB. So we'll work with you on that, and we'll likely bring it before you at some point in the next 2 or 3 months so that you can see it and discuss it, and I would suggest that vote on it. And I would also suggest if there's a need to look at the bylaws, we do that at the same time. I don't know, to be honest, what the bylaws say, but if there are cleanup issues such as electing a chair, then we should do that, because that was one of the things we cleaned up was the election of the vice chair, and there was a process that the council needed to work on, and they did do that. So we'll also include sections and get into the attachments that need to be there for legal requirements, so the whole Rosenbergs and some of that stuff with the conflicts. And I think it's important to have Chapter 17 of the Muni Code handy, and it should be a handbook that you can bring to these meetings and use as a reference, because sometimes these things come up and you're looking at how do we define a structure, or how do we, those are things which sometimes are easier to read. And then we're open to other suggestions. And so you can make them tonight, or you can make them tomorrow when you're thinking about, hey, it'd be nice to have this in the handbook. I look at this a lot, or this is something that I would want to see. And just, through myself or Irene, just feel free to make those suggestions. And then finally, future training and enhancements. There's been talk about having a session, which I do think is appropriate, on findings and objective standards. This kind of comes into how you back up your decision, what evidence you're using, and what you're referencing, so that it is defendable. I know that Gary does 2 hours on the Brown Act. I think he told me. This is all at your discretion, but I would tell you that, again, if you're unfamiliar, these are resources you can find and we can provide to you. But anything you want more in depth in terms of the summary that Mackenzie gave you tonight, we can come back with that. I already talked about enforcement and compliance. I know that's a big issue, so I think that's a good conversation for us to have. State housing laws. This is, to me, and we, in my previous jurisdiction, ran a housing authority, so I had housing people that were on this, and it's a very hard issue. We don't have a housing authority. We don't have a housing staff. We actually utilize the city of Napa to act as our housing authority, if you didn't know that. So I'm trying to figure out how to bring them in to the conversation, because they have those people and they're watching this stuff, and it changes pretty rapidly. So every year there's new legislation, and what passes, what doesn't pass affects local control and the decisions that are going to be before you. So I am planning to do what we're calling study session, which is a pre-meeting to the council meeting, which would be like a 1 o'clock start on November 7th. We're going to do something on October 3rd related to the next bullet, the green environmental initiatives. We're working on those. But that was something we came up with in the handbook, where the council wanted to have a more interactive and a more free conversation with the community. So the idea was to do these pre-meetings, single item agendas, or just basic context to subject matter and have a more open conversation about things like housing. So, and just so you know, per the Brown Act, you're all encouraged to come, and you would participate like members of the public. You wouldn't act as ZDRB members, but you're welcome to be in the audience. That is allowed, to all be there together and to interact with the council. The League of California Cities puts on an academy. I know that, at least I talked to Commissioner Cook or Board Member Cook. I guess we call you Board Member Cook. He's the commissioner. You've been, and it's a good thing. I mean, you have to travel and spend a few days there. But if any of you want to go, I think it's in February this year down in Long Beach. We can make arrangements for you. And then I'm still working. We got through the governance or the handbook stuff with the council, but we're going to start goal setting in December with the goal of wrapping it up end of January, so then we can start budgeting. And that's typically, what I'm accustomed to, where you spend a few months, establishing goals. I think we're going to try to do a 2-year budget this year. I'm working with the finance team to do that. And then you get into a rhythm, which is appropriate for a town of this size or any municipality of this size, where you kind of go back and forth between goal setting and budgeting, so you can give the time needed to do both. And we're working on that with the staff, but we had a really good retreat a couple weeks ago. This is, at least for me, the most important thing is to get to know the staff and to understand the capacity of the organization. And I've been, like I said, impressed. We're going to segue to the next item, and is we are going to be talking about sort of on-call expertise that we bring in to our I call it the bench, but it's basically into our capacity. So the first being a town arborist, and Irene might mention that, but I think there might be other expertise that we need to have available to us as different things come our way. So that's part of the goal setting, because that requires budgeting and all the stuff that comes with that, council approvals. But I feel like 3 months, we're off to a good start. I'm thankful that we have a fresh start with Ken joining and Steve being reappointed and having Mackenzie here and the rest of the staff. So I'm available, as we all are, with any questions you might have.
Excellent. Thank you for that presentation, all three of you. Initially, I have a couple of comments and some questions as well. One thing in terms of advanced planning that wasn't mentioned, but that I think should be mentioned at this point, is that both Kim, or Member Cook, and myself participated not only in the drafting of the general plan, but then also we both sat on the Zoto ad hoc committee with members of the town council, the previous town council, and the previous town manager and the planning commissioner, or the planning director, to develop enhancements to the municipal code and kind of massage and redraft the municipal code so that it was more appropriately reflecting the initiatives that were set out in the general plan. So it was hugely informative to me. I'm sure to you too. But also, we learned a lot, but I think it also gave us a really incredible opportunity to hone and massage and really dig in and understand the ramifications and effects of some of those really important and somewhat banal aspects of the municipal code that affect everything that we do in this room at these meetings. So that was really great. The other thing I wanted to ask, do we think that Kendra is going to be joining these meetings for code compliance? Is there any value in that, or?
I wouldn't anticipate Kendra to join the meetings unless I feel that it's necessary.
Okay. The other thing that I wanted to ask is in terms of outlining the draft of the handbook for ZDRB members, one of the things that I would love to understand better is what happens to our recommendations once we have a motion and a second and a vote, and where does it go from there? What is the process? How is that communicated to the town council? And in what format do they ingest the information that is coming from these meetings? I know I've talked to several council members individually about different cases where they've said that they go back and they look at the conducting of these meetings to get information. But I'd also love almost like a case study, like when this happens, and this happens, and this is the trail that these things move down. I think that would be really helpful.
Okay.
Anybody else have anything?
Just make sure part of the conflict of interest part is we need a new map of conflicts.
To include new members?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to double check.
We have it. We'll give it to you. We just, Kyle just finished it, so.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Excellent. Is there anything else anybody has a question about or needs to say?
No, that was all helpful, though, for new members and for existing members to remind us some of the procedures. So I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Do we have a motion to move to the next item on the agenda? I'm just kidding. Let's move to the next item on the agenda. We have a public hearing for the consideration of Resolution 23002, recommending that the Town Council adopt ordinance 23XXX, amending sections. Do I read all of this? No? It's the...
You don't need to.
I believe this is the new tree ordinance that we're going to get a public...
Yes. Diane will be presenting this report.
Thank you.
And just for
floor.
clarification, Chair, you don't need to read the whole item. It's only when you do a motion
Okay.
that's
Okay.
the title needs to be read. As for just moving on, you can just say moving on to the next item.
Thank you, Eddie. All right.
Yeah, that
Floor
would
is
have been a
yours.
hefty one. Okay, so tonight, let's get the, can you switch the screens, Eddie? It's okay.
I should announce too that we have new systems, so they're a little bit slow, so we're getting used to them.
Okay.
Okay, so tonight we'll be discussing the proposed amendments, the text amendments to the tree ordinance that will be brought to the Town Council October 3rd. The ZDRB will be making a recommendation to the Town Council on the approval of those minutes. So the text amendments are a result of the Town Council's request, sort of a deep dive into Chapter 17.128, the tree preservation and management. They have a desire to review and improve the regulations and processes within that are governed by that chapter. And the amendments specifically that you'll be seeing today came out of the discussion and the requests that were made by the Town Council on the July 18th meeting. And the tree ordinance is extensive, which is why it'll be brought forward in several segments. So this is just sort of the kickoff to future reviews that you'll most likely be seeing in the near future. And the amendments essentially change three functions of the tree removal permit application processes, as well as adding a definition to the town as for a town consulting arborist, which I'll also give a little brief summary and update on at the end of the presentation. So the first change is as a result of the amendments affects what happens when a tree removal application is received. The amendment would require that all owners within 300 feet of the subject property that's applying for a tree removal be notified via public notice, and that would entail a 10-day comment period. And staff feels that this will increase transparency with the public and also allow for additional information to be included and taken into consideration when tree removal applications when we're conducting a review and making determinations on them. Another change that will occur will be that an arborist report shall accompany each and every tree removal application. As it is now, we don't require them for every tree removal application. It sort of depends on the scenario, but the amendment would require that each and every application is accompanied with a tree removal arborist report recommendation, and that would be conducted by the town consulting arborist. So there would be no applicant bringing in a third-party arborist or an applicant chosen arborist to say. And staff feels that this will reduce the concerns of report adequacy, as well as providing more robust reports with clear determinations in them, because the town arborist will be looking through the lens of the code, and so they'll know on a deeper level what the code, what the end goal is really, and just less room for error basically. And additionally, the report, so when applicants apply for exceptions, when they feel that their tree that they're requesting for removal doesn't require a permit because it falls under one of the exceptions, they'll often turn in a report without an application. That's typical. They don't want to pay the fee for the application but they want to make sure that it can be exempt from requiring the permit. And one thing that will require is that when they submit that report, our new town consulting arborist will also review that report. So they'll do somewhat of a peer review and need to find the same conclusion, and given the same information that the hired arborist was given. And if someone is requesting an exemption without a report, then they would have the choice whether they wanted to choose their own consultant, and then our arborist would look at that report, or they could just go with the town arborist report. So I'm going to review the text amendments in brevity since they were provided in the resolution in Exhibit A that was provided to you. However, we can read through them word by word if you wish, but I'll just sort of do a summary, and we can stop me if you want me to read through the actual text amendments. So this first bullet point, this is out of subsection 17.128.050, and this is just including the 300-foot notification that would need to occur as soon as we get an application prior to us processing and making a determination, and that we will adhere to the 10-day comment period before issuing a tree removal permit. And then the second bullet point covers the language that just reflects that the arborist report shall accompany each application and won't be subject to a case-by-case situation. So this is for subsection 17.128.030. This is the hazard reduction and prevention. Earlier, I mentioned that applicants can bring in their own arborist report when they feel that they have an exemption. This would be a case where that would apply to this subsection. So here we're just adding in that instead of it being reviewed and determined by the planning officer, that the town consulting arborist would take a look at it as well, essentially. And that our determination would be the final hazardous rating, which remains the same. So in section 17.128.040, the first bullet is just a cleanup, removing a section, so the applicability of that section applies to the whole chapter. And the second bullet point is for if an applicant is submitting a report to be exempt from requiring a tree removal application and they want to use their own arborist, again, the town arborist will be required to review that report and possibly write their own report supplemental to having the report from the applicant. And lastly is just adding the definition to section 17.236.010, which is the definitions for Title 17. And since the July 18th meeting, the town council meeting staff has been working on obtaining a town consulting arborist, and we're in the last stages of that, so we should be able to give you an update pretty soon. And I know that was a lot of information, so feel free to ask questions.
My questions pertain to clarification of the exemptions. Can you explain to us what kinds of exemptions a homeowner might believe they possess that would alter that process?
Yeah, absolutely. I printed it out so I would have it handy. Even though I look at this stuff quite consistently, I come in here and I go blank, so. Oh, shoot. You know what? I grabbed the wrong paper, actually. But off the top of my head, some of the exemptions would be, for one, would be a hazardous rating. So if there's an imminent threat, like if there's a tree and it's, on its way to dying and the limbs are falling off under a walkway or causing severe damage to property, that could be grounds for an exemption. If they submit an arborist report that certifies the tree is dead, then that could be an exemption. That's two of them that I could think offhand. They mainly have to do with imminent threat of safety to people or property, or if a tree is dead.
And there's also if it's a tree that is a fire hazard, like a eucalyptus or
Yes, that is correct. So any pyrophytic trees we don't require a permit for those for removal, and they're also banned from being planted.
Board Member Henthorn, I believe your microphone is either off or you're not close enough to it.
Okay. So yeah, I had another question about exemptions, and maybe this is here somewhere or implied somewhere and I missed it, but as a realtor and a former landscape designer, what often necessitated tree removal was a tree compromising a foundation or a swimming pool or something like that. The closest thing I see to that is tree removal or alteration is deemed by the homeowner or HOA when it can be demonstrated that the tree is causing damage to a utility. But I don't see anything about structural integrity being compromised, and maybe that's in there and I missed it.
Yeah, it's just not it's not an exemption or an exception. So that's a tree that was causing damage off the top of my head. So I would hate to misstate, but off the top of my head, it wouldn't be in there because it's in another section where it's part of our review process in allowing us to authorize that removal. So that would be a reason that we would approve an application for a tree removal and then subsequently condition that trees equaling the same DBH that would not cause damage that are more appropriate for that space would be planted.
Okay, so it's not intended to be in there as an exception.
Correct.
Okay.
Just to clarify this, having just gone through this process, what you're talking about needing tree removal permits are just heritage trees and protected trees.
Correct.
So there's already a definition in the town's paperwork? So we're not talking about all trees everywhere. We're only talking about heritage oaks and protected trees based on size.
Yes.
So
And
that's all this refers.
Yes, and the definitions for those are in the chapter 17.128.
Right.
So it's any heritage tree that's on the map, any tree of any species outside of the pyrophytic that is 12 inches in dBH or more, and any oak that's not on the map that's 10 dBH or larger.
Right. So these are bigger. Okay. Just to clarify that. I have lots of questions, but other people can go first if you want. Do you have a question?
I just wanted to clarify, the intention is to have the 10-day notice to 300-foot radius prior to the town consulting arborist making any findings.
Yeah, and I had thought about that too, but that was just the request. There's been a lot of concern and ask for basically, people wanting to know what's going on in their neighborhood, more particularly what's happening closer to their house. And that's something that you guys can discuss of whether it makes more sense to send the notice out after the town arborist has made a determination, and then send that notice out and hold a public comment period for that time frame. That would be a recommendation that you could make to the town council.
Okay, so my understanding is right now we're only asking questions, we're not making recommendations, correct? Okay.
I was just testing you.
And leading off of that, the resolution states that the 10-day comment period for each tree removal permit application received, but people can make applications that are not complete, right? So we only want to talk about, it would make more sense to me to talk about, okay, now I'm getting into my opinions. Things that are already going to happen, and you have the information from the arborists. So that's more of a discussion item. Got it. My other comment is...
It's a slippery slope.
It is. Do we want to... So people can come in, have a tree that's a heritage tree or a protected tree, want to take it out for some construction reason, and they can bring an arborist report? So we're not going to, a situation like that where a protected or heritage tree is being applied to be taken down is only going to have one arborist review? Instead of having them bring one in and then have our arborist review it, we're just going to have our arborist review it.
They would conduct the inspection and write the report.
If I may, again, it is our preference that our town arborists do the actual report. Should a property owner bring in a report from their own arborist, we would have our arborist review it. But again, our practice from going forward would be that we'd like to have our town arborist review the trees and evaluate them.
And does that make sense financially? Would he be doing the same process whether he's doing the entire review or just reviewing a report?
All the costs would be borne by the property owner.
Okay.
The issue that I asked about with the exemption, it seems that exemption and the process that ensues once someone believes they possess the exemption, and that's on the homeowner, not involving the town, that it seems like it puts a homeowner that wants a tree removed in the position of saying, like, oh, this tree is dying and it's going to fall down, so I'm exempted, and then they don't have to apply, right? Because it's an exempted.
If we and the planning officer and now the planning officer in tandem with the town's consulting arborist agreed with that report.
A dying tree doesn't happen fast.
Right.
I mean, it's dying.
Well,
So you have
and
time to get a report.
and it's also a foregone conclusion that every tree is going to die.
Well, it's not, dying isn't an exception. Dead is an exception.
Okay.
Yes.
But
True. Dying still goes through. Dying is the one that we're really mostly looking at
So-
because we're finding reports coming in that saying this tree's dying, this tree's dying, this tree's
I'm
dying. Okay.
back to our earlier discussion about trying to distance ourselves from and look objectively. I read the arborist report for the tree that inspired this conversation. And it indeed said that the tree was dying and that there was that it was imminent that limbs were going to fall off. That, to me, is an accepted tree. Not accepted, but accepted.
That's why I'm
And I'm
concerned
finding...
about one arborist report.
Me too. And one of the things that I'm wondering if it makes any sense to do is to have, anytime you are applying to have a tree removed, whether it's an exception or not, you apply. If it's deemed that it's an exception, your deposit's returned to you. That seems like it secures the review on the part of the town, so that there's always a process that includes the town and doesn't necessarily put the onus of proving that there's an exception on the homeowner.
So it's requiring a process,
Yes.
just like you would
Excuse me.
for
There's a fly.
a removal of a
And a
protected
spider.
or heritage tree. It's a process in place.
And it's a process either way, but it's a short, abbreviated process if that's deemed to be an exception, and therefore it's not a financial hit on the town.
If I can just come in as the Rosenberg cop here, because I don't know if you have a public comment, but I do think you're now moving into like you're making statements.
Discussion.
And you're
Okay.
sort of forming a motion or whatever. And I also know, and Mackenzie, maybe you can chime in, but on this one specifically, there's sort of a two-part action potentially where you would look at what's before you, and there's advice. I can't remember how it's actually worded, but generally that they would advise council, and then we could take further comments for the council's consideration.
Okay.
And I don't know exactly how you would word that, but I do think you kind of have to, when you get to the point where you're making a motion, I do think you have to kind of bifurcate that so that, and what I will just tell you, because I'm learning a lot about trees in the last few months, is part of the reason the arborist was selected is to help us shape the second step of whatever the ordinance needs to become. And I think what we're trying to do is react to what we heard in the first step of here are some things we can do immediately to sort of shore up the ordinance, to improve noticing, deal with a number of the issues I hear you discussing. But what's next? And one of the things, listening to the town, the arborist that we're working on the contract with, there's a lot of it. This fly is falling whoever's talking, I think. Anyway, there's a lot of suggestions I think we will hear from him, because he's definitely well versed in ordinances throughout the region, and I think we all are kind of our own little experts in trees. But I think I would tell you, let's get through step one.
Right.
Any comments that you have that you want us to forward along to the council as they talk about step two would be appropriate. But let's try to break those two things up, if that makes sense.
Okay, so then my initial question to you about the exceptions, you clarified that the exceptions are trees that are highly flammable and aren't even on the list of things that you can plant. Trees that are compromising the integrity of utilities or potentially foundations or structures, and then The third exception that we talked about was
These are dying.
trees that are dying or where limbs are imminent of lopping off and killing someone. So, okay, that clarified my question, and then I have comments later.
Looking at what you're calling Exhibit A, which has all the red print on it, on page 2, when you get down to B, where a hazard can be reduced to less than significant level or hazard as determined by the town consulting arborist or other certified arborist in a written tree report, all mitigation measures shall be taken. Can you clarify? I don't understand that.
So that's just saying, if somebody applies for a tree removal application and they're saying this is a hazard to my roof, it's very close to my roof line, it might fall and damage my roof. If the arborist report provides, the town favors mitigation over anything else. So any measures that can be taken to bring a tree back to health, or in this case, from the clause you're reading, to minimize any hazard, those are favored. So that section's just saying, that those are going to be favored over the removal.
And you're willing to take a other certified arborist and not our arborist?
Initially, yes, because that would maintain continuity between the people that are applying for an exemption. I shouldn't say applying because there's not an application, but people that are bringing forward an arborist report that's stating, look, my tree's completely dead, or look, my tree is going to fall any second. Here's the arborist report stating that I don't have time to go through the tree removal application process. And so the change that's occurring would be that we would now have a town consulting arborist that could look at this report, go look at the tree and do a site visit and say that this is correct and cooperate with it.
Okay. The very next one, C, where two or more conflicting tree reports, the planning officer, in consultation with the town consulting arborist, shall make the final determination. In my gut, I would rather see a board make that decision, like ZDRB or town council.
So again, this is referring to the hazard, just the hazard section.
Oh, hazard, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair enough. That clarifies that. I think that covers all my questions. Somebody else must have something.
I just have a few. So not to oversimplify it, but just to boil down the proposal here, because there's a lot of details, obviously, is it really saying that the town is going to take a more active role by hiring a consulting arborist to essentially vet any removal applications that come in for objective purposes, and include a 10-day public comment period? Like that's the gist of it, right? The underlying rules around tree, none of that's really changing.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so although there are revisions that you're looking at more red, it's just to make everything coherent with the intent to require an arborist to review and conduct applications.
And the purpose is presumably that if I'm a property owner and I, just to spell it out, I have an agenda to remove a tree for whatever reasons. Historically, I would hire an arborist to evaluate the tree, submit the proposal, and the idea here is to introduce enough town-based objectivity so that my own personal landowner biases don't predominate the decision-making process.
Yes, I think there's inherent issues in hiring in just about any capacity that we deal with. So that's correct.
I just wanted to clarify the context.
Yes.
Because, I mean, that's really the problem that presumably we're trying to solve here. And it says the fee shall cover the full cost of the town to process the application. So it's essentially going to be a new fee on top of the fee. Has that been calculated yet?
No, that has not been calculated yet. The way we're going about that, so just like we have a general clause in our master fee schedule, and just like when people, for instance, for land use applications, they submit a deposit and that deposit is billed against, although they might receive money back, they might owe more at the end, and that, obviously maintains fairness to the applicant, to not be charged beyond the work that was completed. So that's the take that we're taking from a financial standpoint with this. So instead of, we would have the $68 application, but that would be taken out of a larger deposit that would be paid up front with the application.
Okay. And then, this being a hot topic these days, if after the tree is determined to not be removed, right, the town arborist has decided that it does not qualify, what happens if the tree is then accidentally removed? I realize that's probably not part of this, but the truck backed into the tree conveniently when the report was conflicting.
Well, that would be a code violation.
Right. And so I guess, is the code violation changing in this case, or is it still staying the same? Are we revisiting that?
At this point, the code violations are remaining. My understanding is the code violations and the fines for code violations are at their max.
Mm-hmm.
So that will not be changing at this point.
Okay. And this is just for my own education. The determination of a tree as to be whether it's protected or not, who makes that determination?
That's based on when, I think that was decided when the heritage, I don't know the history, I don't want to say for sure, but I believe that was made during the same time as the heritage
Sorry,
tree.
I'll clarify my question. And this is just me just clarifying because I understand it academically. If I'm a property owner and I have a tree and I look at that tree and what is the determination of what that tree is? Who decides whether to?
Well, it depends, but for me, I go out, I request photos. If I can't tell from the photos what species it is, then I'll go out to the site.
Yeah.
I don't just take it blatantly.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess
There is a size.
It's a size.
There's a
Yeah. So any
diameter at breast height measurement.
right. So I guess if I'm and I sorry to be pedantic here, but if I'm looking at a tree it's a small tree in the property, I'm like, I don't need that there, and I chop it down because it's obviously not there. But I guess, what if it's close? Am I expected to take out the tape measure, and am I expected to know as a property owner? I guess
I think the expectation is that you're wanting to follow the regulations imposed by the town, and if you need our help, we're here for you.
Okay. Yeah. So the risk is inherently in the knowledge of whoever owns the property.
Well, but if we're there, if they need help,
Okay.
we'll assist with that.
Okay. No, I just wanted to poke at that. Thanks.
And I just want to delve into that question a little more. So there's heritage trees and there are protected trees. My understanding that what is determining whether it's protected or not is more of a size thing. It's not necessarily that it's a special tree on a list that are considered. It's basically size, unless it's a highly flammable tree, and then it's exempt from that.
Correct.
Okay.
My only last question is because Mackenzie taught us in the last meeting that before we could make a motion, we had to, or part of our motion is that we accept the findings that the town made. And so thank you to the staff for writing up the findings, because that would be really hard.
You're welcome.
Looking at the finding that you've written for number 2, proposed amendments would not be detrimental to the public interest, health, safety, convenience, or welfare of the town. My only problem with making that finding is the word convenience, because we're making the process a little more complicated. Is there any way for us to, do we have to write in our finding that although it is a little less convenient, it is better in the long run? I mean, how do you approve, how are you okay with convenience when you're making something harder?
I think the convenience is that we now have a town arborist on hand, and that the expectation of staff to be an expert at every level of the tree care, that burden is somewhat taken off or shared, and we have that expert to rely on, so that we have more confidence in the decisions that we're making, and hopefully that the residents of the town do too.
Okay, if they come in and ask first, if they hire their own arborist first and then bring in a report, we're adding another step.
They don't have to do that if they're applying for an application, but if they're wanting an exception, they don't have to do it with an exception either. We would just, it would be more of a burden to them to hire their own arborist and then have to bear the cost of our town arborist doing a peer review. So it would make, because we had thought through that initially as well, but actually financially it's less of a burden for the town arborist to just conduct the initial review, opposed to the applicant paying whomever they've hired and then paying for our town arborist to look at that report.
I think the other part of that too is education to the community.
Absolutely.
Updating our information on our website as well too, putting things in our Yountville Connection newsletter that goes out so that people are aware. Also contacting some of the local tree companies that are cutting down the trees so that they're aware of that as well. So I think it's important for most code amendments that information is out there.
Okay.
We do plan, which I believe was in the staff report as well, as utilizing the utility mailers as a way to get information out as well as soon as possible for this, once approved.
Okay, thank you.
One more clarification. In the case of an accepted tree, there is no notification.
Well, no, not the way the amendments are currently written.
Okay.
I think that would be better discussed at another segment of this sort of, I don't want to call it an overhaul, but at looking at the code. It's your prerogative, although I think it's good for an expert to make that determination as to whether we should remove the ability to sort of in an emergency fashion allow a removal.
Do we have public comment? Is everybody ready for public comment on this? Okay. Michael?
Thank you again. I'm Michael Bork. I have a few things. First of all, I'm wondering about the public comment. If it's
Excuse me, Michael. I'm just double checking the microphone. I can't tell if it's on.
I can hear everything.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so my first issue is really around the public comment. I appreciate the fact that would occur, but I'm wondering if there's a possibility that it means anything. If public comment just means that I'm going to know when somebody's going to show up versus if I have a real issue with something. For example, I had a real issue with the tree being removed across from your house, which brings me to my second thing. Poor pyrophytes. We're not in a forest. We're not in a place that can burn down easily. Pyrophytes are just trees that basically need fire to basically pop their seeds out. I think it was a Douglas fir across from you. According to this, you don't have to give a notification. You can tear the damn thing down. It doesn't appear that there's anything that protects them. And we don't have like places in town where there's 20 or 30 of these kinds of trees. These trees are amazing, and they're here and there, and they're beautiful, and they probably fool everybody, and they think they're sequoias. So I would urge you to remove that. at the bare minimum, until you've had an arborist and there's greater consideration about what it means to take a whole class of trees, many of which are extraordinary trees, and simply doom them to being so easily destroyed. So again, as I understand it, somebody could have moved that tree without telling you in this new code, this new direction. They didn't need anybody's approval to do so, and I think that's a problem. So I would say that in Exhibit A, where you've got exceptions, I would encourage you to remove that, and also there's that is reflected in the resolution as well. So those are my issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Discussion.
Is that in here under Exhibit A?
I'd like to make a clarification that I think maybe need to be made. So from the public comment, it sounds like that things are being added in to allow exceptions. That's not what's occurring here, right? So we're just adding the requirement of the town consulting arborist to conduct review on multiple levels and the transparency of the public notice. The changes to exceptions and other deep dives into the code, we do want to have those. We intend to have those, and they're going to happen when we have a town consulting arborist on staff to give those expert opinions.
Thank you for that clarification. What I'm hearing from Michael is a similar concern that I have, that the tree that inspired this conversation would not be affected by the rewrite of some of these
Correct, from
provision.
this amendment.
From this amendment.
It's like the town manager, Ralston, was discussing earlier, we sort of need to separate
Deal with what's
those
in front of
items
us.
and deal with what's in front of us tonight.
Okay. So in dealing with what's in front of us, what the issue that I keep coming back to that I don't necessarily like is that a tree that is known to have an exception will not be notified to the neighbors. And I think the purpose of notification isn't only so that if I like that tree and you want to cut it down, I have an opportunity to come and voice my concerns about cutting that tree down. I don't think that's the whole purpose. I think there's also saving people like myself from the shock and horror of having a team of 20 people removing a tree 40 feet across the street from my house without any idea that this was even happening. It's jarring, to say the least. And I'm not saying that notification is only for alerting people to their ability to protest a situation. There's also notification so that we understand what's going on. And that doesn't seem to be included in this.
I think, as we talked about a little bit earlier, as part of you make your motion and deal with what's in front of you. But if you want to make suggestions as this goes forward to the council, it is something that we can include for discussion to the council to consider a notification for trees that are exempt.
Okay.
So I think following what Director Borba is saying, I think at this point, and we need a motion and a second, and you can make all those statements so we can put them into the record and then share with the council, because you don't have to approve this decision, but it has to be part of the conversation as deliberation.
I think
I would just go back to my previous comment in terms of bifurcating what's before you in the resolution, and then, if there's modifications to that, without going into great detail in terms of comments, because I do see that next hearing before council to be the opportunity to look at the step 2. And it sounds, if I was to
two being what in that case?
A more comprehensive look at the ordinance, and that would include, in my view, how you view exceptions. Because exceptions are exceptions because at some point somebody decided that those are exceptions, and you're questioning.
But what's before us, Brad, is the supposition of a notification going out for trees that have been applied for, but the exceptions don't need to be applied for.
Right, and I'm telling you, because we don't have the arborist, I don't think there's anyone who can sit here as an expert and tell you why there are exceptions. And I know there's a lot of conversation about that, but I think that would be a really good comment. I mean, I'm saying you can't change, I guess, the resolution in front of you, but I don't know enough about how the exceptions are worded, what findings were made to support that. And I think we're trying to take this one step at a time. And it started, just so you know, I mean, it did, I guess, amplify with this tree. But I think it started before that, based on what I've heard. There's been a number of, trees that have come down for different reasons. And so when we went to council, we went through all of that. Mm-hmm. They gave us direction, to come back with what's before you tonight. So it kind of goes through that cycle of.
So I guess I'm not as concerned about the exceptions as what triggers notification. Mm-hmm. The exceptions are kind of beside the point. We've been asked to approve something that allows, or that stipulates that a notification goes out on every application that's made, I guess. And now I see what the conflict is that because you don't have to have an application if you've got an exception, then the notification only goes out to those that are applied for.
I was going to add that,
Yes.
Stephen, because that's why these things have to start out as a conversation, because there has to be background done first. I don't even know if we could enforce doing a public notice on something that we don't even have an application for. So there's just things that sort of need to be thought through before we can make changes.
Are we saying, okay, so public notice and notification to 300-foot
Yeah, I'm saying
perimeter is the same thing?
If there's an exception that someone comes forward with an exception, we don't have, outside of an arborist report, the way the process works now, we don't have an application for that, right? We don't have it, so there's no process in place. There's no paper trail. It's just like we're sending out notices based on an arborist report that we got from somebody that they're concerned about something on their private property. There's just more to it that needs to go into it before you make the amendment.
So to move this
Makes sense.
forward, to clarify, the decision we're making here is that in the case where there is the allowance of a protected tree to be removed, two steps are being taken. There's a town arborist who's going to review it and determine that it is okay. And to avoid the shock of that happening, people within a 300-foot radius are going to be notified and allowed to comment on it. But ultimately, it's really to alleviate that specific case. What I'm hearing from the town manager is that if we have comments about other things that should be looked at, we should make those comments, but those aren't up for decision at this point.
Yeah,
Chair Miller, if you don't mind me adding really quick for you and the board, this is going back to public comment because it was acknowledged, but we received 2 electronic public comments and the other one's not read into the record. Would you like me to read it before you continue this conversation, the discussion?
Yeah, sure.
This was from Lori Stelling. Dear Zoning and Design Review Board members, as a parent who cares deeply about today's children having the chance to a sustainable future, I just wanted to take a moment this afternoon to encourage you to support Resolution 23-002, recommending the Town Council amend Youngville Municipal Code to require a public notice and comment period for tree removal permit applications. That arborist reports be conducted by the town consulting arborist for tree removal permit applications and define town consulting arborist. This resolution is in alignment with the climate emergency proclamation adopted by the Youngville Town Council last year and is a conscious action step forward in addressing the climate crisis. Thank you for listening to the recommendations of Napa Schools for Climate Action Youth and for doing all you can to address our planetary crisis within this crucial decade. And just wanted to reaffirm again that we did receive the other public comment from Alison Bensick. which was read earlier in the meeting by mistake of the town clerk.
Thank you.
Can I speak now? Well, first of all, I think I do support the idea of having the impartial town consulting arborist. I think that that's a great idea. And let me know if I need to word this in a motion, but I think it makes more sense to have that arborist's findings before any public notice is put out, because I know if I were a neighbor and there was a tree coming down and I was maybe going to, not to the extent that I could oppose it or comment on it, if I had all the information there, maybe it is compromising their foundation, or maybe it is some sort of danger that I don't initially understand, and that is going to change, whether I oppose it or not. And also, perhaps the arborist report deems that it cannot be taken down, or it's not approved to be taken down, and then the applicant withdraws his application and it never needs to come before the public at all. So I think having all the information available is important before putting out a public notice.
I agree with that.
Should that have been a motion?
No, it was a.
I think that's part of the motion.
You can make it into a motion.
Yeah.
I think we should move to motions. How about you?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Do you want to make a motion?
I'll give it my best shot. But, so I'll make a motion to approve these changes in the staff report and recommendations with the modification that the public notice period include the report from the arborist prior to being communicated.
I second it.
Okay, so before we vote on it, you've made just to trying to understand what Brad was talking about earlier, he's made a motion. Did you say specifically to approve the resolution number, blah, blah, blah?
I didn't say that.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't say the number. I just
But
said
also-
as presented.
Including the comments made to staff? Is that part
I
of?
think that kind of comes after. So I think you're taking your formal motion based on the staff report that's before you this
Right.
evening. There's a modification which feels like it's in bounds. And I'm looking at Mackenzie, but she's not. So I would suggest you vote on that. And I think the rest of the comments, whether we need a motion or you all kind of just continue the conversation. I've heard some things. I think we're taking notes, but it's more useful to have a motion on comments. But I just don't know, Mackenzie, since that's not agendized, we're hearing you. I would also tell you, you are, as I mentioned earlier, able to come to the meeting and participate. We will have the arborist there, so I think it will be more useful to have someone there that can really opine as an expert on some of these things that you're bringing up.
I guess my question was more technical. He said he made a motion to approve the resolution and the comments that we've made to staff. Is that?
Oh, I see. I heard the noticing.
Oh, you didn't?
No, I specifically said to basically approve the recommendation and resolution with the modification that the town arborist has made their assessment and it is included in the communication. So it was a modification, it wasn't a comment.
Okay.
I think some of the comments were things like broader notifications,
Right.
which trees are exempt, that sort
Right,
of thing.
okay, I thought you said.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
Should I remake the motion?
No.
You already did. I
Okay.
think we got the motion. I understood it. I'm assuming you did, Eddie.
I do. Yes.
And then, Brad, if I wanted to add to that motion that the comment about a broader notification, would that just be in the context of this broader
I think we'd have to
conversation,
define
or-
that because we're going to bring back, this is an ordinance, right? So we're going to have to develop language based on what Michael just suggested, which I think is doable. But, a broader noticing to me gets a little vague at this stage. But if you were to do something, per Rosenberg, you would either offer a substitute motion or ask Michael for a friendly amendment. But based on what you said, I think, again, based on what
how would you broaden, I guess, the notice thing? Is that by geography or by limiting exemptions? I mean, I think if you're talking about broadening geography to 500 feet, then that's probably something that we could
I'm talking
bring
about
forward.
broadening it to include notification on trees that are coming down that have been exempted and approved for removal.
See, I think that's something that has to be discussed further with more expertise, because I just don't have a basis for why they're exempt, and that's not being agendized this
And
evening.
I'm not talking about the exemption. I'm talking about
Notification.
7 o'clock in the morning and there's 30 people across the street from your house and cones in front of your driveway.
No, I understand your point, but the point is the tree's exempt per the code as it's written today, and there's nothing before you tonight that talks about why it shouldn't be exempt. And we can't process a permit for something that's already given by right. That would require a total overhaul of the code, which may be doable with the expertise of an arborist to say, here's how you do something like that. But that's clearly, in my view, a second step.
Actually, this makes more sense to me now, is to think about an application for an encroachment permit. If you're going to have cones up and down the street to take down the tree, then you need an encroachment.
Well, that's required today. If you're going to do any work in the required
Okay, so
street, you're required to have an
the instance that I'm referring to, they just didn't do that.
I'm not
They
familiar.
did, but you don't get noticed
You don't
of an
get
encroachment
notice for
permit.
those.
The way I'm interpreting it is that what I'm hearing is that there are potentially numerous topics that can evolve from here, especially when an arborist comes on board. The consulting arborist may look at the tree ordinance and say, I actually have some recommendations on how to change it, in which case when that happens, it comes back before us. Absent that, I would say any one of us as concerned citizens have the ear of the staff to be able to raise concerns, which could turn into ordinance changes, which ironically would come back before this board in due course.
Yeah. Okay.
Was there any discussion with regards to the notice, and we've made at least the motion to move the findings forward before the notice, but if the public made comments and opposed it, for example, then are they then informed that in spite of your opposition, this is still going forward? Is there any sort of second notice or anything that was discussed?
No, nothing like that was discussed.
Okay.
It is.
Okay. No, that wasn't discussed.
Okay.
I was going to say, you are adopting the resolution as it is written right now with the modification from Board Member Sarguzek. So
Okay.
that's the only thing you have on the table right now.
Okay.
So then, my role as chair to clarify would be that Member Zagorsek has made a motion to approve Resolution 23002 to adopt the ordinance as presented with the modification that the arborist report by the town arborist comes prior to the notification period. And it was seconded by you,
Yes.
yes? And so we vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Simple as that.
Okay. So that motion is approved.
And I just to maybe simplify kind of the next step for you all, because as we mentioned, we're trying to get the arborist under contract. What I would instruct him to do through Irene would be to listen to this meeting so he can hear all of the comments that were made by you and the public. And then I'm really interested to hear, and I do think if you're participating in the October 3rd meeting, we're likely to do a study session at 1 o'clock prior. I'm still not sure how that'll be organized. we're definitely going to be talking about the ordinance during the regular meeting at 3 o'clock. But there may be ability to talk. I don't want to focus the whole 2 hours on trees at 1 o'clock because we're going to be talking about green and health initiatives, other things. But I think that's an opportunity for you to participate. And my hope would be that the arborist would be in a position to really kind of provide some proactive advice in terms of what the next step would be, and also reference, other ordinances that we can look at, because we're not inventing things here. I do think that these are general concerns, and I also think my view would be, if I was asked, and I wasn't tonight, but just so you know, rather than create a tree committee, I do believe the ZDRB can act in that capacity, because certain, and I've seen other cities that actually create a little tree committee, but I do think with the workload that you have and the passion you have for trees, that would be my suggestion if somebody proposed that, because I think that adds another layer, and it seems as though you're all thinking.
Would that make
the
it the
right way.
ZDTRB?
We could do that, but I think
Is there a limit to number of letters in an acronym?
Yeah, but it's also be careful what you ask for. But I do think that, again, reviewing other municipalities, there are in many cases tree committees. But that would just be something as you think about this, and maybe do some homework on other towns and municipalities. You might be able to find some nuggets and offer them to the arborist, who clearly is a knowledgeable expert on these subjects.
I saw this basically as opening the door to that, because bringing on a consulting arborist, adding this extra step, introducing the notion of public comment, to me is the start of a process, as opposed to, the conclusion of something else.
Right.
So to me, in the spirit of that seems pretty reasonable.
I may be conflating notification with notification. One of the things that one of our council members suggested to me that would have been nice would be, just a piece of paper taped to the tree that said, "This tree's coming down." And that would have allayed some of what I'm trying to express in this meeting. It's not necessarily a public notification, but just a heads up.
I understand what you're referring to, and again, with encroachment permits, we typically don't notify people, but and not necessarily all tree companies are required to get an encroachment permit, depending on how they're doing the work. So in some circumstances, if we put like a noticing in with encroachment permits, but there's that circumstance when we don't have an encroachment permit because it's not required, that there won't be a notice. But I take that.
That would be an example of a comment.
It's a kindly neighbor thing to do when you're having trees taken down. So that's the problem we run into when they're not neighbors.
Well, and also, I guess, understanding, encroachment permits are I guess I'm thinking back to my city days when if you had an encroachment permit, there was a notification posted that said no parking within 100 feet of this sign. That kind of thing could be adopted in a smaller town way. I think that would be helpful to neighbors, and just a neighborly way of approaching it.
Yeah.
Okay.
They were being neighborly.
Yeah. Okay.
Should we move on to staff and board reports?
Yeah.
Yes. Staff and board reports.
Well, you all know there's a town arborist coming on board, so I don't need to report that.
Say more about that.
We do have a couple of administrative approvals that we did that I just want to make sure that you're aware of. There was an exterior modification and a master sign plan amendment for an expansion of the awnings on the front of the Bouchon Bakery. They have an existing awnings. There's two of them, and they combined them into one larger type awning. And because there's signage on it, there was also a master plan master plan amendments. So again, we approved those administratively. We felt that they were consistent with the zoning ordinance. The other thing that was approved administratively was a construction of an outdoor kitchen at 1881 Larkspur. And again, we felt that it was a minor and incidental type of addition. So we approved that structure as well, too, for the property.
I don't think you mentioned, but I'd like to add, and we're preparing the agenda for the 19th, or the next council meeting, next Tuesday. In addition to the report on the gas station ban, which you all heard before, I think we can mention that we, in the spirit of increasing enforcement, we intend to bring forward an item which would, in essence, allow us to not allow anyone to apply for a permit that has an outstanding violation, which is something that doesn't exist in our current code. So we are looking, and that doesn't have to go through you, but through the attorneys. We're looking for gaps in our code where we can be a little more strict, and that, to me, is an obvious one. If you have an unresolved violation, then you shouldn't be able to apply for any new permits until it's resolved. So that'll be coming forward too, and we are, like I said, there's limitations, and we're trying to push the envelope, but it is something that I know Irene and Gary worked on, so that'll very likely be on the 19th agenda as well.
Excellent. So we are at item number 11, which is having to do with adjournment. Anyone?
Michael's specialty.
Sure.
Michael's specialty?
You're going to regret this. I make a motion to adjourn, and in the spirit of this meeting, make like a tree and leave.
Oh, man. See, that's why you're the best. I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.